Warm greetings to one and all. Today, I'm going to speak on a very important theme, and that is role of fundamental duties in the real nation building. These days, most of the people talk about their rights and not so much regarding their duties. The general legal awareness discourse also centers on knowing the rights. It is indeed a bit surprising that fundamental duties are not discussed in the same way or with the same zeal and zest. Rights and duties are essentially two sides of the same coin, complementing and supplementing each other. In fact, if people follow their fundamental duties well, then either the instances of violation of rights will not arise, or occurrences of such infringements will be pretty less. As the citizen, so is the nation. It is a well-known fact because it is the citizens who determine the character. It is the citizens who build the image of the country. There are essentially three important elements which together make a country, constitute a country, and make a country which is in all terms advanced and developed. These three essential elements are: number one, vision for making a great country; number two, existence of machinery or a system for realization of the noble ideals which are enshrined in the vision document for the country; and number three, ideal citizens who can accomplish the said vision by realizing the noble ideals provided for in the vision document. It is the ideal citizens who can incessantly do their utmost for taking the country to the next level of excellence. If we see in the context of India, we find that all the three elements are present. In the first place, there's a great vision document in place, that is the Constitution of India. It is this document which prescribes the noble ideals in the preamble itself. Secondly, our Constitution remarkably establishes the machinery in the forms of principal organs of the government. And thirdly, we find that we have citizens, but we need to see whether the country has got the ideal citizens who can accomplish the vision enshrined in the Constitution. And when we say ideal citizens, we have to see it from both the angles. One, citizens running the government. Secondly, the common citizens. Now, when we see the Constitution of India, a natural question arises as to why did the framers of the Indian Constitution did not feel the need of incorporating fundamental duties in the Constitution. Now, a few reasons could be attributed to this question. Firstly, perhaps the framers felt that there was no need to expressly mention fundamental duties in the Constitution because the framers of the Indian Constitution, who practiced a high order value and who followed noble ideals, they considered that these noble values are integral part of the Indian way of life. Secondly, the explicit mention of the noble ideals and the vision of securing for all the citizens justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. These were explicitly mentioned in the preamble to the Constitution itself. And perhaps it was thought that it is sufficient that for fulfilling these noble ideals as enshrined in the preamble, one has to the citizens have to discharge their basic duties. Thirdly, the fundamental rights, which we find in Part 3 of the Constitution, have duties inherent therein. Perhaps this could be the reasons why the framers did not think any specific need for stating fundamental duties in clear terms in the Constitution. Nevertheless, with the passage of time, the continuing dereliction of values and ideals warranted the clear inclusion of fundamental duties in explicit terms in the Constitution. As a consequence of which, in the year 1976, the All India Congress Committee adopted the proposal made by the K Singh Committee, which suggested for the insertion of fundamental duties of citizens in the Constitution. Accordingly, by the 42nd Amendment of the Constitution, effected in the year 1976, Article 51A, which provides for fundamental duties, was inserted. When in the year 1976, this article was inserted, we had 10 fundamental duties, and subsequently, one more fundamental duty was added. So altogether, at the moment, there are 11 fundamental duties. The incorporation of fundamental duties in the Constitution is also in tune with Article 29, Clause 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that everyone has duties to community, in which alone the free and the full development of his personality is possible. It was indeed a prudent decision on the part of Parliament to explicitly include fundamental duties in the Constitution. We can just see what these fundamental duties are as enshrined in the Constitution. Article 51A provides that it shall be the duty of all citizens of India to follow these fundamental duties, which are 11 in number. If one goes through all the fundamental duties, one finds that these duties are actually a compendium of noble values and ideals such as humanism, nationalism, common brotherhood, fraternity, preservation of a composite culture, protection and preservation of nature, natural environment, and inspirations. The first fundamental duty is to abide by the Constitution and respect the ideals and institutions of the Constitution, the national flag, and the national anthem. So this first duty covers within its ambit 5 important elements: the Constitution, the ideals of the Constitution, institutions of the government, institutions of the Constitution, the national flag, and the national anthem. So every citizen has to accept and conform to all the 5 elements as stated in fundamental duty number 1. We know that the Constitution of India is the holy book for the governance of the Indian democracy. The noble ideals of the Constitution have been provided for in the preamble itself. The preamble secures to all its citizens justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. These ideals, as stated in the preamble, are to be achieved by every government. This is the mandate of the Constitution. The main institutions of the Constitution are the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. When one has some issues with any of these institutions, which is quite natural, the Constitution in that case also provides for an adequate constitutional mechanism for the redressal of one's grievances, which means a citizen is not expected to resort to any unconstitutional means for the redressal of grievances. the national flag, the national anthem. These are symbols of unity and oneness. The second fundamental duty is to cherish and follow the noble ideals which inspire our national struggle for freedom. As we know, the Indian national struggle for independence was more than a mere political freedom. It had multifaceted dimensions. It is the fundamental duty of every citizen, therefore, to cherish and follow the noble ideals which inspired our Indian national struggle for independence. Observing this fundamental duty is perhaps the most befitting tribute to all the countless freedom fighters who sacrificed their lives for the sake of the freedom of this country from the foreign rule, in the hope that one day India would be free from the foreign rule, and that an ideal society, a society free from all evils, would be founded. Then we see the third fundamental duty, which is to uphold and protect the sovereignty, unity, and integrity of India. For building a strong and robust India, it is the most fundamental duty of all people of India, all citizens of India, to uphold and protect the sovereignty, unity, and integrity of the country. It is not just the duty of the armed forces and the police, it is the duty of every citizen. The fourth fundamental duty is to defend the country and render national service when called upon to do so. Those who are in the defense services, they are already defending the country. In this duty, these words, when called upon to do so, mean that common citizens also, who are not in the defense services, may be called upon to defend the country and render national service whenever they are called upon to do so. And when they are called upon to do so, it is the fundamental duty of all common citizens to defend the country and render national service. Clause E provides for the fifth fundamental duty, and that is to promote harmony and the spirit of common brotherhood among all the people of India, transcending religious, linguistic, regional, or sectional diversities, to renounce practices derogatory to the dignity of women. Thus, when one sees this fundamental duty, one gets to know that religious, linguistic, and regional or sectional diversities should not come in the way of fraternity, harmony, and the spirit of common brotherhood among all. Further, it is the fundamental duty to relinquish practices which are demeaning to the dignity of women. Our parliament and state legislatures have enacted a number of legislations prohibiting practices which are derogatory to the dignity of women. For example, Dowry Prohibition Act was enacted long ago in the year 1961. Then recently in 2013, a very important law was passed, that is the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013. Then moving on to the next fundamental duty, that is duty number 6. Now, this duty provides for valuing and preserving the rich heritage of our composite culture. As we know, India has been the birthplace of great philosophies, religions, saints, thinkers, kings, kingdom, science, industry, not to forget, art, architecture. So India's civilization is one of the world's richest and oldest civilizations. All Indians are and should always be extremely proud of the cultural advancement of this country. Therefore, it is the duty of all the citizens of this country to value and preserve the rich heritage and composite culture of India. No country can create a vibrant future by forgetting its magnificent past. In fact, one can construct a brighter future by getting inspiration from its glorious past. More so, it is the duty of every citizen to pass on to the next generation the rich heritage and the composite culture of that country. The seventh fundamental duty is to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. For the survival of a country, it is equally important that its natural environment, including all forests, lakes, rivers, wildlife, that is protected and also improved, as also to have compassion for all living creature. The way different kinds of pollution are degrading the quality of environment, it will be difficult to preserve the environment unless all the citizens take up the duty of guarding and also improving the natural environment, because the government alone cannot do this just by making laws. The eighth fundamental duty is very important one. It is to develop the scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform. This fundamental duty, I believe, has not been paid due attention to. By discharging this extremely important duty, the citizens can become, in true sense, the ideal citizens. In the beginning of this talk, I said that there are three elements which together can make a country advanced country or developed country. And of the three elements, two elements are undoubtedly present in our country. The third element was about the presence of ideal citizens who can accomplish the noble vision as stated in the vision document. So we need to see whether the citizens of this country, whether the people of this country are the ideal citizens who can accomplish that goal. They are ideal citizens if they observe this very important fundamental duty. And as I just said, by discharging this, by observing this fundamental duty, the citizens of this country can in true sense become ideal citizens who can accomplish the noble vision provided in the Constitution, which is the vision document for this country. Scientific temper connotes a viewpoint or an approach based on thirst for knowledge, reason, rationality, and experience, as opposed to superstition or blind faith. Humanism is predominantly rationality together with sensitivity. And humanism should be reflected in the conduct and in the behavior. And the spirit of inquiry and reform in the minds of citizens will take the nation to the next level of excellence. The ninth fundamental duty is to safeguard public property and to abjure violence. Because by safeguarding public property and abnegating violence, one can contribute significantly in the nation building. Because damaging or causing damage to public property and resorting to violence will only result in weakening the country. The 10th fundamental duty is to strive towards excellence in all spheres of individual and collective activity, so that the nation constantly rises to the higher levels of endeavor and achievement. A nation can reach the highest level of excellence only when all the citizens strive towards excellence in their spheres of individual and collective activity, so that the nation constantly rises to the higher levels of endeavors and achievements. And the last fundamental duty, which was inserted in the year 2002, and that is every citizen of India who is a parent or guardian is to provide opportunities for education to his child, or as the case may be, ward between the age of 6 and 14 years. This constitutional amendment was made in the year 2002. This amendment assumes great significance because by this Constitution 86 Amendment Act, Article 21A was inserted in the Constitution, which provides that state shall provide free and compulsory education to children of the age 6 to 14 years in such manner that the state may by law determine. This amending act has also substituted a new article for the previous Article 45. Now, after this amendment, 2002 amendment, Article 45 provides that state shall endeavor to provide early childhood care and education for all children until they complete the age of 6 years. This amending act also added 11th fundamental duty. That is, fundamental duty of every citizen who is either a parent or guardian to provide opportunities for education to his child or ward between the age of 6 and 14 years. Thereafter, having seen what these 11 fundamental duties are, a very important point emerges, and that is how to effectuate fundamental duties. Because merely stating fundamental duties is not sufficient, although important, but then a more important point to be considered is how to effectuate. There are different ways by which fundamental duties may be effectuated. They can be broadly classified into these four: awareness, inculcation, aspiration, and implementation. The first phase of effectuation is awareness. This is the first and the foremost. So we need to spread awareness about these duties among the entire population, when including the educated and even highly educated sections of the society. Now, this task can be accomplished by various activities. For example, organizing seminars, conferences, or similar events focusing fundamental duties, or devoting at least one technical session on fundamental duties in these events. Second is inculcation. The best way to effectuate fundamental duty is to inculcate these duties, a sense of these duties in the lives of the people of this country. Therefore, it is the duty of parents, elderly people, teachers, professors to inculcate these duties in their children, their wards, their students, their scholars. Educational institutes are to play a very important role in this regard. Character building, which includes inculcation of fundamental duties, must be the ultimate object of education. State has a very important role to play in this regard. If you see, the essence of fundamental duties was pressed upon even in the National Education Policy 1986, with modifications undertaken in the year 1992 as well. If one sees the present National Education Policy, the aim of this new National Education Policy 2020 is to create a novel system that is aligned with the aspirational goals of the 21st century education, including Sustainable Development Goal number 4 of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, while building upon India's traditions, value systems, rich heritage of ancient and eternal Indian language. One can see in the vision document itself what the policy provides for. As the vision of the NEP is stated in the document itself, it reads, the policy envisages that our curriculum and pedagogy of our institutions must develop among the students a deep sense of respect towards the fundamental duties and constitutional values, bonding with one's country, and a conscious awareness of one's roles and responsibilities in a changing world. Now, this NEP 2020, I'm sure, is going to play a huge role in this regard, particularly in the aspect of inculcation of fundamental duties. The next is aspiration. After inculcation comes aspiration. Earnest and actual inculcation of fundamental duties will naturally generate aspiration among the people. And this aspiration is for translating fundamental duties into the way of life. And thereafter, the last element is of implementation or enforcement. A genuine awareness, a successful inculcation, and aspiration for fundamental duties will logically lead to automatic implementation or self-enforcement of these fundamental duties by the people. Because by this time they have actually translated fundamental duties in their way of life, which means implementation or enforcement of these duties is the best mode of effectuation. Additionally, these duties, however, may also be enforced by the law. There are at the moment some laws which are there in force, which indirectly enforce fundamental duties. Because as of now, there is no specific law providing for the enforcement of fundamental duties. However, it's always open to the legislature to enact a specific law for the enforcement of fundamental duties. If we see all these fundamental duties, 11 in number, we find that some of the fundamental duties are such that they can be specifically enforced by enacting specific legislations. However, there are some of the fundamental duties which are actually exoneration of basic human values. And these basic human values are to be inculcated among the people of the country rather than being enforced by passing a specific legislation. So, in particular, if I am to say, then I can very well say that out of these 11 fundamental duties, there are 6 fundamental duties which can be specifically enforced by specific laws. The fundamental duties have been highlighted in red. Clause A, Clause C, Clause D, Clause E, Clause G, Clause I, and Clause K. These are some of the fundamental duties which can be enforced by passing specific laws. Whereas the remaining 5 are, as I said, they are the values which are to be inculcated rather than being enforced by passing some specific laws. Secondly, where non-observance of a fundamental duty results in infringement of somebody's fundamental right, then also court can very well provide a suitable relief. Thus, in those cases where fundamental duties of fundamental rights are infringed because of some non-observance of fundamental duty, then fundamental duties are indirectly enforced. Although the main focus is to enforce the infringement of fundamental rights, but then fundamental duties are indirectly enforced. Further, there are some legislative enactments. You can see some of these laws on the slides. These are some of the laws which also provide for prohibition, sanction, and punishment certain acts which may amount to breach of some of the fundamental duties. But a very important point to be borne in mind is that these statutes were not enacted with the aim of enforcing fundamental duties. In fact, some of the statutes were enacted even before the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act. In this list, one can find some provisions in the Indian Penal Code, provisions in the Emblems and Names Prevention of Improper Use Act 1950. Because if we, as the name of this act suggests, this act was enacted in order to prevent the improper use of certain emblems and names for professional and commercial purposes. Then one can also find some provisions in the Representation of People's Act, the Protection of Civil Rights Act, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, so on and so forth. After having seen some of the specific laws which can help in indirect enforcement of fundamental duties, let us see what has been the judicial approach to fundamental duties. You see, the fundamental duties are the duties to be discharged by the citizens, and as such, they do not cast any public duty. Therefore, fundamental duties on their own cannot be directly enforced by writ, particularly writ of mandamus. Earlier, the general notion was that fundamental duties serve educational purposes, and they are in the Constitution as a reminder, for reminding the citizens of their duties, reminding the officials of their duties, and therefore they could not be enforced by the court of law. That was the general notion which prevailed. However, the succeeding judicial decisions indicate that the court takes into consideration the fundamental duties while enforcing any of the fundamental rights, or while giving effect to the directive principles of state policy. It's true that fundamental duties are not directly enforced by a writ court, by issuing a writ, but the mere fact that they are fundamental, every citizen of this country is essentially obligated to discharge these duties. Despite being non-enforceable by writ, the fundamental duties serve cherished guide. They serve as a cherished guide to the constitutional bodies, to the constitutional authorities, and also for constitutional interpretation. They aid the courts in adjudicating issues, in upholding the constitutional values, and also in constructing or molding the reliefs to be given to the aggrieved parties in appropriate cases. On the interrelation between Part 3, that is fundamental rights, Part 4, providing for directive principles of state policy, and Part 4A, which provides for fundamental duties, the Supreme Court of India has opined that while interpreting any of these three parts, the scope and effect of such interpretation on all the three parts of the Constitution must be examined. And in fact, this is the right approach, because these three parts, they together constitute the compendium, and they must be construed together, as the fundamental duties are part of the Indian Constitution. Therefore, the court has to take into consideration these duties while interpreting other parts of the Constitution, in the same manner as in the case of as they do in the case of directive principles of state policy. A citizen must understand that his or her entitlement to right is directly proportional to his or her discharge of the duties, fundamental duties. Although not directly enforceable by the court, the fundamental duties are valuable guide, and they are used as an aid in the constitutional and statutory interpretation. Towards the end, I make a humble suggestion for the inclusion of two duties as fundamental duties. With the passage of time and experiences learned, based on the report of the National Commission to review the working of the Constitution, it may be humbly suggested that two more duties be inserted in Article 51A. First is duty to vote in an election. Secondly, duty to pay taxes. The insertion of these two duties will infuse strength to the democracy of India, as also making the citizens more responsible towards the nation, because the development of the nation depends on various aspects, including uncompromising contribution which citizens can make in these aspects, that is by casting vote in an election and by paying taxes. Concluding this talk, I in the end say that there cannot be a second view that the fundamental duties are fundamental to real nation building. It also signifies that nation building is a collective task, not just the task of the government. Citizens have a much greater role to perform in this regard. The real idea underlying the explicit inclusion of these duties was not to make these duties enforceable by the court of law. That was not the real idea. Rather, these duties were to become an integral part of the way of life of every citizen of this country. In fact, all the fundamental duties are so comprehensive that if they are observed properly by the citizens, then there will be much lesser occasion to resort to Part 3 of the Constitution, that is fundamental rights. It is so because the performance of duties by citizens will automatically result in an orderly administration, so that there will be fewer instances of any breach of fundamental rights. And on the other hand, the directive principles of state policy will be realized effortlessly. With these words, I conclude my talk on this very important theme. Thank you very much.